Hello, Squirrel Squad! Those are nice and bright now. Got the rechargeable batteries in them. And the rechargeable batteries are in those, but I can't find my remote. This is the remote for that, but sometimes this works for that. Oh, look. But it won't turn the... Oh! Just need one more to turn on. Turn on one more. Turn on one more. Oh, come on. Oh, well. 3 out of 4 ain't bad. Chapter 20 of The Murder at the Vicarage. When I got back to the vicarage, I found that we were in the middle of a domestic crisis. Griselda met me in the hall with tears in her eyes, dragged me into the drawing room. She's going. Who's going? Mary. She's given notice. I really could not take the announcement in a tragic spirit. Well, I said, we'll have to get another servant. It seemed to me a perfectly reasonable thing to say. When one servant goes, you get another. I was at a loss to understand Griselda's look of reproach. Lynn, you are absolutely heartless. You don't care. I didn't. In fact, I felt almost lighthearted at the prospect of no more burnt puddings and undercooked vegetables. I'll have to look for a girl and find one and train her, continued Griselda in a voice of acute self-pity. Is Mary trained? I said. Of course she is. I suppose, I said, that someone has heard her address us as sir or ma'am and has immediately wrested her from us as a paragon. All I can say is they'll be disappointed. It isn't that, said Griselda. Nobody else wants her. I don't see how they could. It's her feelings. They're upset because Lettuce Prothero said she didn't dust properly. Oh, Lord. Griselda often comes out with surprising statements, but this seemed to me so surprising that I questioned it. It seemed to me the most unlikely thing in the world that Lettuce Prothero should go out of her way to interfere in our domestic affairs and reprove our maid for slovenly housework. It was so completely unlettuce-like, and I said so. I don't see, I said, what our dust has to do with Lettuce Prothero. Nothing at all, said my wife. That's why it's so unreasonable. I wish you'd go and talk to Mary yourself. She's in the kitchen. I had no wish to talk to Mary on the subject, but Griselda, who's very energetic and quick, fairly pushed me through the door into the kitchen before I had time to rebel. Mary was peeling potatoes at the sink. Good morning, I said nervously. Mary looked up and snorted, but made no other response. Mrs. Clement tells me you wish to leave us, I said. Mary condescended to reply to this. There's some things, she said darkly, as no girl can be asked to put up with. Will you tell me exactly what it is that has upset you? Tell you that in 2 words I can. Here I may say she vastly underestimated. People coming snooping around here when my back's turned, poking around. What business of hers is it how often the study is dusted or turned out? If you and the missus don't complain, it's nobody else's business. If I give satisfaction to you, that's all that matters, I say. Mary has never given satisfaction to me, I confess. That I have a hankering after a room thoroughly dusted and tidied every morning. Mary's practice of flicking off the more obvious deposit on the surface of low tables is to my thinking grossly inadequate. However, I realized that at the moment it was no good to go into side issues. Had to go to that inquest, didn't I? Standing up before 12 men, a respectable girl like me, and who knows what questions you may be asked. I'll tell you this. I've never before been in a place where they had a murder in the house, and I never want to be again. I hope you won't, I said. On the law of averages, I should say it's very unlikely. I don't hold with the law. He was a magistrate. Many a poor fellow sent to jail for potting at a rabbit, and him with his pheasants and what not. And then before he's so much as decently buried, that daughter of his comes around and says I don't do my work properly. Do you mean that Miss Prothero has been here? Found her here when I come back from the Blue Boar in the study she was, and oh, she says, I'm looking for my little yellow berry, a little yellow hat. Hooray. I left it here the other day. Well, I says, I haven't seen no hat. It wasn't here when I done the room on Thursday morning, I says. And oh, she says, but I dare say you wouldn't see it. You don't spend much time doing a room, do you? And with that, she draws her finger along the mantel shelf and looks at it as though I had time on a morning like this to take off all them ornaments and put them back, with the police only unlocking the room the night before. If the vicar and his lady are satisfied, that's all that matters, I think, miss, I said. And she laughs and goes out of the windows and says, oh, but are you sure they are? I see, I said. And there it is. A girl has her feelings. I'm sure I'd work my fingers to the bone for you and the missus. If she wants a newfangled dish tried, I'm always ready to try it. I'm sure you are, I said soothingly. But she must have heard something, or she wouldn't have said what she did. And if I don't give satisfaction, I'd rather go. Not that I take any notice of what Miss Prothero says. She's not loved up at the hall, I can tell you. Never a please or a thank you, and everything scattered right and left. I wouldn't set any store by Miss Lettuce Prothero myself, for all that Mr. Dennis is so set upon her, and she's the kind that can always twist a young gentleman round her little finger. Mary's doing some talking. During all this, Mary had been extracting eyes from potatoes with such energy that they'd been flying around the kitchen like hailstones. At this moment, one hit me in the eye and caused a momentary pause in the conversation. Don't you think, I said as I dabbed my eye with my handkerchief, that you've been rather too inclined to take offense where none is meant? You know, Mary, your mistress will be very sorry. Your mistress will be very sorry to lose you. I've nothing against the mistress, or against you, sir, for that matter. Well, then, don't you think you're being rather silly? Mary sniffed. I was a bit upset, like after the inquest and all. And a girl has her feelings, but I wouldn't like to cause the mistress inconvenience. Then that's all right, I said. I left the kitchen to find Griselda and Dennis waiting for me in the hall. Well, exclaimed Griselda, she stayed, I said, and sighed. Lynn said, my wife, you have been clever. I felt rather inclined to disagree with her. I did not think I'd been clever. It's my firm opinion that no servant could be a worse one than Mary. Any change I consider would have been a change for the better. But I like to please Griselda. I detailed the heads of Mary's grievance. How like Lettuce, said Dennis. She couldn't have left that yellow beret of hers here on Wednesday. She was wearing it for tennis on Thursday. That seems to me highly probable, I said. She never knows where she's left anything, said Dennis with a kind of affectionate pride and admiration that I felt was entirely uncalled for. She loses about a dozen things every day. A remarkably attractive trait, I observed. Any sarcasm missed Dennis. She is attractive, he said with a deep sigh. People are always proposing to her. She told me so. Oops, sorry. They must be illicit proposals if they're made to her down here, I remarked. We haven't got a bachelor in the place. There's Dr. Stone, said Griselda, her eyes dancing. He asked her to come and see the barrow the other day, I admitted. Of course he did, said Griselda. She is attractive, Lynn. Even bald-headed archaeologists feel it. Lots of S.A.s, said Dennis sapiently. And yet Lawrence Redding is completely untouched by Lettuce's charm. Griselda, however, explained that with the air of one who knew she was right. Lawrence has got lots of S.A. Those are abbreviations. What is S.A.? Himself. That kind always likes the, how shall I put it, the Quaker type. Very restrained and diffident, the kind of woman whom everybody calls cold. I think Anne is the only woman who could ever hold Lawrence. I don't think they'll ever tire of each other. All the same, I think he's been rather stupid in one way. He's rather made use of Lettuce, you know. I don't think he ever dreamed she cared. He's awfully modest in some ways, but I have a feeling she does. She can't bear him, said Dennis positively. She told me so. I've never seen anything like the pitying silence with which Griselda received this remark. I went into my study. There was, to my fancy, still a rather eerie feeling in the room. I knew that I must get over this. Once give in to that feeling, and I should probably never use the study again. I walked thoughtfully over to the writing table. Here Prothero had sat, red-faced, tardy, self-righteous. And here, in a moment of time, he'd been struck down. Here, where I was standing, an enemy had stood. And so, no more Prothero. Here was the pen his fingers had held. On the floor was a faint, dark stain. The rug had been sent to the cleaners, but the blood had soaked through. I shivered. I can't use this room, I said aloud. I can't use it. Then my eye was caught by something, a mere speck of bright blue. I bent down between the floor and the desk. I saw a small object. I picked it up. I was standing staring at it in the palm of my hand when Griselda came in. I forgot to tell you, Lynn, Miss Marple wants us to go over tonight after supper to amuse the nephew. She's afraid of his being dull. I said we'd go. Very well, my dear. What are you looking at? Nothing. I closed my hand and, looking at my wife, observed, if you don't amuse Master Raymond West, my dear, he must be very hard to please. My wife said, don't be ridiculous, Lynn, and turned pink. She went out again, and I unclosed my hand. In the palm of my hand was a blue lapis lazuli earring set in seed pearls. It was rather a unique jewel, and I knew very well where I had seen it last. And that's it. All of chapter 20. See how long 21 is. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, this one looks short too, so we'll try to get through this. 21. I cannot say that I have at any time had a great admiration for Mr. Adam Raymond. Gosh knows. Mr. Raymond West. He is, I know, supposed to be a brilliant novelist and has made quite a name as a poet. His poems have no capital letters in them, which is, I believe, the essence of modernicity. His books are about unpleasant people leading lives of surpassing dullness. He has a tolerant affection for Aunt Jane, whom he alludes to in her presence as a survivor. She listens to his talk with a flattering interest, and if there is If there is sometimes an amused twinkle in her eye, I'm sure he never noticed it. He fastened on Griselda at once with flattering abruptness. They discussed modern plays and from there went on to modern schemes of decoration. Griselda affects to laugh at Raymond West, but she is, I think, susceptible to his conversation. During my dull conversation with Miss Marple, I heard at intervals the reiteration, buried as you are down here. It began at last to irritate me. I said suddenly, I suppose you consider us very much out of the things down here? Raymond West waved his cigarette. I regard St. Mary Bead, he said, authoritatively, as a stagnant pool. He looked at us, prepared for resentment at his statement, but somewhat, I think, to his chagrin, no one displayed annoyance. That's really not a very good simile, dear Raymond, said Miss Marple briskly. Nothing, I believe, is so full of life under the microscope as a drop of water from a stagnant pool. Life of a kind, admitted the novelist. It's all much the same kind, really, isn't it? Said Miss Marple. You compare yourself to a denizen of a stagnant pond, Aunt Jane? My dear, you said something of the sort in your last book, I remember. No clever young man likes having his works quoted against himself. Raymond West was no exception. That was entirely different, he snapped. Life is, after all, very much the same everywhere, said Miss Marple in her placid voice. Getting born, you know, and growing up and coming into contact with other people. Getting jostled. And then marriage and more babies. And finally death, said Raymond West. And not death with a death certificate always, death in life. Talking of death, said Griselda, you know we've had a murder here? Raymond West waved murder away with his cigarette. Murder is so crude, he said. I take no interest in it. That statement did not take me in for a moment. They say all the world loves a lover. Apply that saying to murder, and you have even more infallible truth. No one can fail to be interested in a murder. Simple people like Griselda and myself can admit the fact, but anyone like Raymond West has to pretend to be bored. At any rate, for the first 5 minutes. Miss Marple, however, gave her nephew away by remarking, Raymond and I have been discussing nothing else all through dinner. I take a great interest in all the local news, said Raymond hastily. He smiled benignly and tolerantly at Miss Marple. Have you a theory, Mr. West? Asked Griselda. Logically, said Raymond West, against flourishing his cigarette. Only one person could have killed Prothero. Yes, said Griselda. We hung upon his words with flattering attention. The vicar, said Raymond, and pointed an accusing finger at me. I gasped. Of course, he reassured me. I know you didn't do it. Life is never what it should be. But think of the drama, the fitness, the church warden murdered in the vicar's study by the vicar. Delicious. And the motive, I inquired. Oh, that's interesting. He set up, allowed his cigarette to go out. Inferiority complex, I think. Possibly too many inhibitions. I should like to write the story of the affair. Amazing amazingly complex. Week after week, year after year, he's seen the man at vestry meetings, at choir boy outings, handing round the bag in church, bringing it to the altar. Always he dislikes the man. Always he chokes down his dislike. It's unchristian. He won't entertain it, and so it festers underneath. And one day, he made a graphic gesture. Griselda turned to me. Have you ever felt like that, Lynn? Never, I said truthfully. Yet I hear you were wishing him out of the world not so long ago, remarked Miss Marple. That miserable Dennis, but my fault, of course, for ever making the remark. I'm afraid I was, I said. It was a stupid remark to make, and I really I had a very trying morning with him. That's disappointing, said Raymond West, because, of course, if your unconscious were really planning to do him in, it would never have allowed you to make that remark. He sighed. My theory falls to the ground. There's probably a very ordinary murder, revengeful poacher, or something of that sort. Miss Cram came to see me this afternoon, said Miss Marple. I met her in the village, and I asked her if she would like to see my new garden. Is this like to see my gardens? Is she fond of gardens? Asked Griselda. I don't think so, said Miss Marple with a faint twinkle. But it makes a very useful excuse for talk, don't you think? What did you make of her? Asked Griselda. I don't believe she's really so bad. She volunteered a lot of information, really a lot of information, said Miss Marple. About herself, you know, and her people. They all seem to be dead or in India. Very sad. By the way, she has gone to the hall for the weekend. What? Yes, it seems Mrs. Prothero asked her, or she suggested it to Mrs. Prothero. I don't quite know which way about it was. To do some secretarial work for her. There are so many letters to cope with. It turned out rather unfortunately. Dr. Stone being away, she has nothing to do. What an excitement this barrow has. Stone, said Raymond. Is that the archaeologist fellow? Yes, he's excavating a barrow on the Prothero's property. He's a good man, said Raymond, wonderfully keen on his job. I met him at a dinner not long ago, and we had a most interesting talk. I must look him up. Unfortunately, I said, he's just gone to London for the weekend. Why, you actually ran into him at the station this afternoon. I ran into you. You had a little fat man with you with glasses on. Yes, Dr. Stone. But my dear fellow, that wasn't Stone. Not Stone. Not the archaeologist. I know him quite well. The man wasn't Stone, not the faintest resemblance. We stared at each other. In particular, I stared at Miss Marple. Extraordinary, I said. No suitcase, said Miss Marple. But why, said Griselda, and there's words missing. No, it's not. It scooted over. Doggone. Okay. The suitcase, said Miss Marple. But why, said Griselda. It reminds me of the time the man went round pretending to be the gas inspector, murmured Miss Marple. Quite a little haul he got. An impostor, said Raymond West. Now this is really interesting. The question is, has it anything to do with the murder, said Griselda. Not necessarily, I said, but I looked at Miss Marple. It is, she said, a peculiar thing. Another peculiar thing. Yes, I said, rising. I rather feel the inspector ought to be told about this at once. And that's it. So we read 20 and 21. So, bookmark 22. Hope you have a lovely, crafty, stay warm day. Our snow and ice is hanging around. I just took my foot and kind of went on the top of the kitty litter, and it's slick as owl, you know what. So this gal's gonna stay in, try to get some stuff done. Right now I'm freezing, so I'm probably gonna turn on this little heater or turn my heat up. Okay, hope to see y'all live at 5 today, and hope I find my remote so I can get that 4th light up. Where did things go around here? I'd like to know. I love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Bye-bye.